They called her Eden Crow because she never belonged to a garden, only to dust and rumor. When the wind rustled through the town of Dryhook, it carried more gossip than rain, and Eden's name drifted with it, whispered in saloons, hissed behind hymnals, carved into the outhouses with crude blades. She was 22 the spring they came for her, though her eyes had weather older than the rocks. Her mother had died under strange moons. Midwives swore they saw the devil's mark on Eden's shoulder. No father claimed her. She'd grown up half wild, half starved, with no one but an old mule and a Bible with missing pages. They said she bewitched old Mr. Jarrick's son, that she led him under the cottonwoods by the creek, that she laid him down and called thunder from a clear sky. Nobody spoke of how the boy drank himself dead 3 nights later, how he'd been beaten purple by his father's switch for loving a girl not welcome in church pews. Easier, cleaner, to say she cast a spell. Easier to keep her unholy and him innocent as a lamb. So, one dusk, when the air was thick with sage smoke and the men's boots scuffed the clay road outside her shack, Eden knew. She felt it in her belly like a cold stone. They didn't knock. They just came, 5 men with rope, one with a spade, another with a jug of whiskey swinging like a bell from his hand. No sheriff, no preacher. Just a hole waiting somewhere behind the Miller place. They dragged her by her hair when she stumbled. No trial. No last words that would change a thing. One of the women, Ruth Miller, round with child, watched from her porch. She spat once but looked away when Eden's eyes found hers. There were no prayers when they dropped her at the lip of that shallow grave. Just muttered curses and the soft, sick thump of the first shovelful of earth landing on her skirts. Eden did not scream. Not then. She just lay still as they pushed her down, dirt clumping in her hair, slipping inside her collar. She tasted clay when she breathed. She coughed it out once, twice. Then the last thing she saw before they finished burying her alive was the moon, a thin sickle behind the clouds, cutting open the sky for her shame to seep through. The men stood there after, boots lined along the rim of raw earth, shadows stretched long. One spat, another crossed himself. Then they left, leaving the mound to settle, to hide what they had done. Only Ruth lingered, trembling in her apron. She shuffled forward once, touched the packed dirt with her shoe, and whispered something no one heard but the mule tied to Eden's fence. The mule who brayed once, loud enough to echo into Dryhook's black fields. In town, they'd say the devil took her back that night. The shame buried, the sin undone. But the prairie wind carried more than gossip. It carried the sound of footsteps through brittle grass. And far off, beyond the last fence post, a man rode beneath the dying moon. A man with raw hands, haunted eyes, and a promise left rotting too long in his throat. His name was Callum Rourke. Folks called him Rourke because he did not answer to Callum anymore. He had shed that name the day his wife, Marybeth, went down in a flood that took the bridge and their unborn son with it. Since then, he rode fence lines for other men, mended gates, broke mustangs no one else would touch. He spoke little, drank less, but his hands never forgot how to hold a shovel, or how to cradle a face turned toward dying. He heard about Eden while he was shoeing horses behind Larkin's barn. Boys with dirty nails, half drunk on pilfered gin, bragged how they'd watched old Jarrick's kin handle her justice. Said she was a witch, said she had it coming. Rourke didn't say a word. Just tested the horse's hoof for a split, hammered the new shoe on tight, and told Larkin he was done for the week. By the time he saddled his mare, the sun was gone, and Dryhook's fields lay under a bruised twilight. He tied his bedroll behind the saddle horn, tucked his old Sharps rifle under his coat, though deep down he knew no bullet could dig a girl out from under a crime like that. He rode anyway, because something in him, something stubborn as a mule's spine, said a body should not lie under dirt if they'd done no wrong. Rourke's mare, Mags, picked her way through dry scrub and ghost fences. A wind came down off the mesa, rattling mesquite branches like bone chimes. He tasted dust, cold as iron on his tongue. Somewhere behind him, Dryhook's lanterns flickered out, one by one. Folks curling up in their warm beds, while Eden Crow lay beneath the ground, breath rattling against a mouthful of dirt. He found the mule first tethered by its frayed rope, eyes wet, hooves stamping like it wanted to dig too. Rourke dismounted, ran a palm down the beast's flank. He muttered soft words, Same ones he'd spoken to his wife the night the flood came for her. Maybe the mule listened better than God did. Past the mule, he saw the earth raw, disturbed, the shape of a hurried sin, a grave not fit for any soul, let alone one still pulsing in the dark. Rourke dropped to his knees before it, laid his palm flat on the mound. The ground was warm still, holding her heat like an ember. He reckoned he had minutes, maybe less. He threw off his coat and set to digging. No spade, just calloused fingers, cracked nails, knuckles raw. He clawed like an animal, scooping dirt by the handful, flinging it behind him in wet clumps. Mag stood silent, but the mule brayed once, sharp, as if to keep him awake. Every breath Rourke took filled him with the taste of her, that copper tang of soil and sweat and shame, buried too soon. His arms burned. Dirt bit under his nails. But he kept digging, deeper than he'd ever dug his grief. He would reach her, or he would bleed trying. Above him, the wind cut through sagebrush, carrying far-off prayers, hushed, broken words from Ruth Miller, alone by her lamp, rocking on her porch, whispering to a God who did not answer witches or widowers. Rourke's hands found fabric, cold, stiff, then a softer thing, her wrist, limp in the darkness. He dug harder, cursed under his breath, the tears cutting tracks down his dirt-caked face. He did not know if she'd open her eyes. He only knew he would not cover her again if she didn't. The first thing Eden knew was pain where her lungs should be. The second was the cold slap of air hitting her mouth, tasting like grave soil and old sins. She did not rise graceful like a ghost. She choked on her own spit, clawed at Rourke's arms with nails that left raw trails on his forearms. He held her anyway. "Easy, girl. Easy," he rasped. His voice cracked from dust and effort. The word easy, a lie in a world that had never given her ease. Eden rolled to her side, vomiting up mouthfuls of clay. Her hair was tangled with root scraps, her dress half torn where he dug and pulled. She coughed so hard she thought her ribs might splinter. Each breath sawed in and out of her chest, raw as new skin. She tasted blood at the back of her throat, but did not care. The world was air again, and she would take it in, greedy and shuddering. Rourke knelt beside her in the shallow ruin of her grave. His hands bled at the knuckles, raw flesh and dirt in the cracks. He wiped her mouth with the back of his sleeve. She flinched, but her eyes cracked green, bright under the smudge of soil locked on his like they might anchor her back from whatever black place she'd just scraped past. For a moment neither spoke, just whined hissing through grass, the mule stamping behind them, Mag snorting softly. Somewhere a nightbird called, unseen. Eden's fingers dug into the earth at her side. She pulled at the dirt like she didn't trust it to stay beneath her. "You," her voice scraped out like a rusted hinge, "you should have left me." Rourke shook his head. His hat had slipped off, hair sweat, soaked to his brow. "Couldn't." "Why?" She coughed again, spat to the side. The spit was streaked red. "Some things ought to be buried. You ain't one of 'em." He tried to help her sit, but she batted his hand away. Eden pushed up on her elbows, swayed like a newborn colt, then forced herself upright in the grave pit that had almost been her coffin. The moon watched overhead, a thin blade of light catching the wet on her cheeks. She wiped it away with the back of her wrist, smearing dirt and tears together into something like war paint. Rourke reached for his coat, draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her frame, but she pulled it tight, greedy for warmth. Her breath misted in the cold. She looked around, took in the mule, the mare, the wide, hungry dark pressing in. "They'll come for me," she said. Her words were flat, factual, like saying tomorrow the sun would burn down again on Dry Hook's Lie. Rourke stood, offered her his hand. She stared at it, then at him, then away, as if the trust cost more than breath itself. Finally, with a grunt that was more curse than thanks, she let him pull her up. Her legs wobbled but held. "Then we don't let him find you here," he said. His voice was low, but it carried promise. Not clean, not holy, but hard as bone. Behind them, the grave lay open, a scar in the earth that would not heal. Eden Crow wrapped herself in the widower's coat and stared at the hole that had nearly taken her. She did not cry for it. She did not pray over it. She just bent down, scooped a handful of dirt, and let it trickle through her fingers, a promise of her own. They left the grave behind them like a wound that would keep weeping long after dawn. Rourke lifted Eden onto Mags. She was too weak to argue when his hands braced her ribs and boosted her into the saddle. She perched there like a scarecrow, draped in his coat, eyes darting to the black edges of the prairie as if the shadows themselves might reach up and finish what the men started. He led Mags on foot, reins wrapped tight around his palm. The mule followed of its own stubborn mind, hooves thudding soft in the dirt behind them. The night breathed cold down the back of Rourke's neck, that sharp hush before the wind turned warm again. A coyote called far off, quick yips swallowed by distance. Eden's breath rasped behind him. He glanced up at her now and again, pale face framed by tangled hair, jaw clenched like she was fighting to stay awake. Her knees pressed into the saddle's edge, boots slipping from the stirrups more than once. He slowed when she swayed too far, steadying her with a hand to her ankle. "You ever ride before?" he asked into the hush, voice careful not to carry. "Not with a hole in my throat," she rasped back. A dry laugh, more cough than mirth, broke from her chest. Then quiet again, just her shallow breaths and the whisper of leather creaking. They skirted Dry Hook wide, keeping to the brush where the sage grew thick and the cottonwoods tangled their roots through old fence lines. Rourke knew the back ways the path's ranch hands used when they didn't want to pay for whiskey with coin, but with pelts or favors. He knew where the ground dipped into gullies deep enough to hide a horse's hooves, where the barbed wire lay rusted and easy to step through. After an hour, the grave dirt on Eden's skin had dried to dust. She shivered under his coat but did not ask for fire. Fire drew eyes. Fire drew talk. Instead, when they came to an abandoned sheep shed half collapsed against a stand of rock, Rourke tugged Mags to a stop. "Here," he said, nodding at the lean-to's shadow. Eden peered down at him, lips cracked. "This your idea of heaven?" He almost smiled, but it snagged halfway up his cheek. "Ain't heaven I'm worried about." He helped her down slow, careful. She hissed when her feet hit earth, knees folding until he caught her under the arms. Up close, she smelled like blood and dirt, and dry weeds crushed under boot soles. He'd smelled worse in the war when he'd knelt beside his brother in a trench outside Chattanooga, pressing bandages against a belly that wouldn't close. Inside the shed, the air was thick with old hay, dry and brittle as kindling. Rourke found a corner where the wind couldn't snake through. He eased Eden down onto a pile of wool sacks. She gathered them around her like a nest, arms wound tight across her chest. "You running for good?" she asked, voice muffled by her sleeve. "Don't run," he said, crouching to check the doorway. "Not anymore. Just don't abide graves that ain't earned." Eden barked a laugh, sharp, raw, and then winced at her ribs. "Oda bury this whole place then." Rourke settled by the door, rifle across his knees, eyes sharp for any lantern glow threading through the night. Behind him, Eden's breath evened out by inches, not safe yet, but alive. The moon crawled higher, painting silver lines across the battered roof, and in that hush, a widower and a witch lay awake under the same ragged sky, bound by dirt, rumor, and something like mercy. Eden woke to the scrape of metal and the soft clink of tin. Rourke knelt near the splintered doorway, coaxing a few dry twigs into a flame no bigger than a prayer. The sheep shed breathed stale with old lanolin and mouse droppings, but the dawn outside broke clean and cold, painting the world a sharp blue. Her throat rasped when she spoke. "You said no fire." Rourke glanced back at her. His eyes were red, rimmed from sleeplessness, hands wrapped tight around the tinderbox. "No fire if we rode through, but you'd fall off Mags before we crossed Miller's Creek. Gotta get something in you." She shifted under the scratch of burlap sacks. Her dress still smelled of wet earth. She plucked at the hemstiff with grave dirt, then gave up, pressing her palm flat to her chest as if to feel the beat still there. Rourke poured a little water from his canteen into a battered tin cup, set it near the flames. He rummaged in his saddlebags for dried beans and a sliver of salt pork. The meager fare hissed when he dropped it in the cup. Smell faint, but enough to make Eden's empty belly twitch with need. "How long since you ate proper?" he asked. Eden snorted, voice dry. Proper ain't a word Dry Hook knows. He passed her the cup when the brew turned muddy. She took it with trembling hands. Every swallow hurt raw lines down her throat, where she'd clawed for air under 6 feet of betrayal. She drank anyway, like each mouthful might anchor her to this side of the world. Rourke settled against the shed wall, rifle within arm's reach. Dawn painted him in pale gold. He looked carved from old storms, skin weathered, shoulders hunched like he'd never stood up straight since burying his Marybeth. Eden's eyes flicked to his hands, knuckles raw, dirt embedded under the nails, faint scars hidden among fresh scratches. "You dig a lot of graves?" she asked, the question soft but sharp enough to catch his attention. "Not for the livin'." He rubbed his palms together, flakes of dried blood falling like ash. "First time I pulled one back out." A ghost of a smile twitched at her cracked lips. She tipped the tin cup back, draining the last bitter mouthful. "Lucky me." Rourke shrugged. "Lucky ain't the word I'd hang on this." Outside, a crow called once harsh and low. Eden stiffened, eyes darting to the shed's half-collapsed wall. Rourke's head lifted too, ears straining for hoofbeats, for boots tramping the brittle sage. "They'll be lookin' come sunup," she said. "Boys brag, boys drink. By now, half the town knows you took me." "Let 'em know," Rourke said. He stood, checked the Sharp's rifle, sighted it through the crack in the door. "Ain't the first time I've been hated for doin' right by the wrong folk." She studied him, the way he braced the barrel against his thigh, calm as a man mending fence wire. There was no grand speech in him, no preacher's promise, just the quiet shape of a man who had nothing left to lose but his own raw word. Eden pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders. Something behind her ribs sparked small but hot enough to smolder. Shame buried her once. She'd be damned if she'd crawl back under for Dryhook's peace. Somewhere down the slope, dogs barked a ragged, distant alarm. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Eden set the empty tin aside and shifted closer to him, grave dirt still under her nails. "Got a plan, Rourke?" she asked. He looked at her witch, grave girl, rumor-made flesh, and nodded once. "Don't need one," he said, voice quiet but flinty. "Got hands, got ground. Ain't afraid to use either." And outside, the prairie held its breath, waiting for Dryhook's reckoning. By mid-morning, the prairie gave up its hush. The dogs' barking grew sharper, tethered to men's shouts in the jangle of tack. Dryhook's men came slow at first, 2 riders pushing over the ridgeline where old Miller's fence gave up to sagebrush. They squinted against the sun, seeing nothing but scattered boulders and the weathered skeleton of the sheep shed half folded into the hill. Inside, Eden lay flat against the dirt floor, Rourke his rifle braced on the edge of a hay bale, the barrel trained through a split plank. He breathed slow, steady, counting heartbeats. Dust motes, the tiny shift of wind when a man calls your bluff with a lantern and a rope. Eden's fingers twitched at the hem of his coat. She tasted grit on her tongue, but it wasn't grave dirt this time. It was the raw taste of a new wrong done to her name, drifting on the wind like pollen. She wondered if it ever left a person, or if rumor clung forever, same as clay under nails. Outside, the riders swung down. One knocked boots together, spitting dry chew. The other uncoiled a rope-thin hemp, frayed near the loop. Eden's breath hitched at the sight. Her mind flashed back to fists knotted in her hair, dirt pressed to her teeth. Ruth Miller's wide eyes in the dusk. Rourke caught the tremor in her shoulder. He leaned down, close enough she felt his breath warm her ear. "Ain't nobody burying you again, girl. Not while I got a pulse." She didn't trust words. She trusted the raw edge in his voice. That was enough. The riders paced slow toward the shed, boots crunching frost-hardened grass. One called out, voice cracked like dry boards. "Rourke, we know you're in there. Ain't no use hidin'." Rourke stayed quiet. His eye never left the sight. The second man spoke up, a younger voice, sharper, too eager. "We want the witch. Ain't about you. Hand her over, right off clean. Nobody cares what you do after." Eden felt something twist inside her, sharp and furious. Hand her over. Like she was a calf to be branded, sold, roped again. The mule outside stamped, rope tugging at its post, like it heard every word and wanted none of it. Rourke spat once, dark stain on pale hay. "Ain't no witch here. Just dirt and rumor. Get off my fence." The older rider laughed, a dry bark with no humor. He lifted the rope, flicked the loop like a snake's tongue. "Got a rope says different." The standoff cracked when a figure appeared behind the riders, a small shape, shawl flapping like a broken flag. Ruth Miller, heavy with child, feet bare in the cold dawn dirt. Her husband's shadow trailed her, silent, shamed, useless. Ruth stepped up to the older man, grabbed the rope from his hand like she owned it. She spoke low but clear enough that the cold wind carried it. Ain't no witch. Just a girl you wronged. Bury this rope or bury yourselves, but you ain't using it here." The men stared, stunned by the smallness of her defiance. The mule brayed once, ears flat back. Ruth held the rope high, eyes locked on Rourke's shed as if to say, "Not again. Not this time." Inside, Eden's hand found Rourke's arm. She felt his heartbeat where her palm pressed bone. Out there, the prairie-shifted rumor met mother's courage. Rope met bare feet, and for a breath the earth remembered what mercy felt like. Rourke's rifle stayed steady. The riders shifted, glancing at each other, at the rope dangling like a curse in Ruth's grip. And the wind carried the hush of a town, caught between its own lie and the first crack of truth. Ruth Miller's hand trembled as she held the rope high. Its frayed loop swung in the cold morning breeze, catching the sun like an old sin catching light. The two riders shifted their boots in the frost-crusted grass, uneasy now men who'd never been told no by a woman round with child and barefoot on their road. Ruth's husband hovered behind her, mouth working but no words spilling out. He'd tried once, weeks back, to talk her out of whispering prayers for Eden. He'd failed. Now he just stared at the rope in her grip, shame stitched into his silence. Inside the shed, Rourke lowered the rifle an inch, not much, but enough to show Eden that the fight outside was not just his to shoulder. He watched Ruth's spine straighten with each breath, the way her bare toes dug into the dirt as if she'd root there if she had to. He admired it more than any sermon he'd half heard on some dry Sunday. Eden pressed closer to the crack in the wall. Her pulse thumped hot behind her eyes. She had been the town's ghost, the cautionary tale young girls whispered about at well pumps. Don't kiss behind the cottonwoods. Don't meet Eden's green eyes. But here was Ruth, belly round with tomorrow's life, risking her standing for a grave girl half buried in lies. The older rider spat on the dirt. "Ruth, you get on home. You ain't got say in men's reckonings." She didn't blink. "Reckoning's the Lord's, they tell me, and I reckon he don't abide you burying his shame with your shovels." The mule brayed again, loud enough to startle the younger rider's horse sideways. The rope in Ruth's hand swung, brushing her skirt. She took it in both fists now, bold, unflinching. Rourke's voice cut through the boards, low, rough. "You hear her clear, Jerrick's men? You bring that rope here again, you'll need more graves come sundown." He didn't shout, didn't threaten with fire and brimstone, just spoke plain the way a man does when he's got nothing but his spine and a trigger to guard what's right. The older rider's lips curled. "We done buried her once. She's a curse on this dirt. You standin' with her means you're next." Ruth stepped closer, so close the horse's hot breath steamed her hair. "Then bury me too, and this child. Or drop that rope." Her husband found his tongue. Then a soft plea, half choked. "Ruth." She didn't spare him a glance. Her eyes pinned the men who'd used the rope on Eden. She did not look afraid. She looked like every mother the prairie ever made, grit and grace forged into bone. Inside, Eden's throat tightened around a word she hadn't spoken in years. "Thank you." But it wouldn't come. Too big, too raw. She touched the rope burn still ringed around her wrist, the mark they gave her because they couldn't wash their boy's sins from his bottle. Rourke's finger hovered near the trigger. He felt Eden's breath at his shoulder, shallow, fierce. He knew then they wouldn't run far enough to stay hidden forever, but for now, they'd stand, together. Outside, the older rider's eyes flicked between Ruth's belly and the mule's restless stamping. The younger man shifted again, hand falling from his pistol hilt. Fear curled its finger in their gut, fear of a woman too stubborn to step back and a man too spent to fear death. The rope drooped, heavy in Ruth's grip. She didn't drop it yet. She just waited, letting the cold sun bear witness. The prairie wind hushed, listening for the break. Silence held the fence line tighter than any wire. The older rider's lip twitched like he wanted to spit again but found no spit left. His eyes flitted from Ruth's bare toes, up to the mule's pinned ears, then to the ragged shed crouched like a secret behind the boulders. Somewhere inside him he measured what it cost to finish what they'd started, and what it might cost now. Rourke felt Eden shift behind him. He didn't turn, just flicked 2 fingers at the boards, telling her to stay down. But she didn't listen. Not this time. Slow as dawn creeping over the mesa, Eden Crow pushed the boards aside with her shoulder and stepped out into the open. The prairie sun caught her hair still matted with clay and hay. threads of old blood dried at her hairline. Rourke's coat hung off her shoulders, sleeves dragging past her dirt-bitten hands. Her bare feet found the cold grass. It stung like needles, but she did not flinch. Ruth saw her first eyes widening, mouth opening like a prayer that forgot how to finish. The riders turned as one, boots scraping frost. Eden moved straight to Ruth. The younger man made to grab her arm but stopped cold when Rourke chambered around, the sharp click snapping the morning's hush in half. Eden stopped in front of Ruth. For a breath the two women stared at each other, one heavy with life, the other dragged back from dirt's edge. Between them swung that rope, the same thin hemp that had closed around Eden's shame when the men of Dryhook buried her under rumor and cowardice. She reached for it. Ruth didn't let go at first. Her hands trembled not with fear but something harder. Eden's fingers curled around Ruth's, and in that clutch they felt the heartbeat of all the women Dryhook ever buried under whispers. Eden's voice came out cracked but steady. "It don't bury me again." Ruth let go. Eden held the rope in her fists, feeling its weight the way it itched her raw wrist where it had left its ring. She turned her back to the riders and stepped to Rourke, who waited by the low fire he'd kindled to warm broth and hands. Without asking, she dropped to her knees beside the embers. The rope dragged through the frost behind her like a snake too dead to strike again. Rourke watched but did not move to stop her. He understood some things needed burning more than burying. Eden fed the rope to the flame an inch at a time. The hemp hissed and curled, smoke rising thin and sharp. The riders flinched when it caught, the smell of scorched fiber drifting through the dry air like a bad memory lifting off skin. When the last loop flared and broke, Eden sat back on her heels. Her shoulders sagged under Rourke's coat, but her eyes stayed bright, 2 embers left after the rope's ghost gave up to smoke. The older rider shifted his weight, boots cracking dry stems. He looked smaller now, as if the rope burning stole the lie from his spine. Rourke spoke then, voice calm as wind through fence posts. "Ain't yours to bury no more. Take your shame home. Leave ours here." No man stepped forward to answer. Ruth stood her ground beside Eden, her hand resting on her belly, that new life kicking against her palm, like it knew this prairie's sin and mercy in the same heartbeat. The mule stamped again, braying once sharp, final. The riders turned their reins, boots striking frost, the sound of defeat softer than any gunshot. They did not look back as they rode for Dryhook's church bell, that never rang for a witch. Eden watched the last coil of rope vanish in ash. She wiped her dirty palm across her mouth, tasting freedom raw, bitter, earned. Behind her, Rourke laid his hand on her shoulder, not to claim her, not to hush her, but to say, "This shame burns with the rope, not with you." By the time the riders disappeared over the ridge, the rope was nothing but a scatter of black threads in the fire pit. The cold morning carried the smell of burnt hemp and old secrets up into the pale sky. No church bell rang in Dryhook, no forgiveness spoken, just silence swallowing up what the wind could not carry away. Eden pressed her palms to the cold earth, where the last of her shame turned to ash. She smeared the soot across her wrists, over the faint rope burn that ringed her like a ghost's grip. The black streaks made her look more alive than any clean skin ever had. Rourke watched her from the lean, two's shadow, rifle balanced across his knees. His eyes were sunburnt from sleepless hours, but softer now, as if the crack of dawn through Ruth's courage and the burning rope made him remember that some graves stayed empty by sheer stubborn will. Ruth lingered too, standing barefoot in the frost, her shawl tight around her shoulders. She bent down, knelt beside Eden. Their foreheads touched for a heartbeat, a blessing with no preacher, no psalm. Just 2 women on a patch of dirt no man would claim righteous again. Ruth's husband called from the fence line, voice small, brittle. "Ruth, come home, please." She stood, smoothed her skirt over her belly. She looked back at Eden once more, eyes bright with the quiet promise that Dryhook's rumor would have to tangle with her truth now. A truth that wore bare feet and carried a child closer to tomorrow than any rope could drag backward. Then she turned, slow and calm, and walked barefoot back across the cold prairie to her waiting, shame-faced man. She never looked back at the shed. She knew the ashes were enough. Eden rose with a grunt, the grave dirt still stitched in her hair. She pressed her wrist against Rourke's coat sleeve, smearing black soot in streaks. He didn't flinch, didn't wipe it away. "Where now?" she asked him, voice hoarse but carrying something sharper than fear. Rourke tugged his hat low over his brow, the sun behind him catching the edges of old scars on his neck, ghosts of a war that never stayed buried either. "Ain't a place waitin'," he said. "But there's ground enough west that don't know your name yet." Eden barked a laugh, dry, broken, honest. "Ground's got a way of learning fast." Rourke's shoulders lifted in a shrug that spoke of fences mended and horses broken, and graves dug for men who deserved them more than she ever did. "Then we keep movin'. Let rumor chase dust instead." She nodded. She bent to the cold earth, scooped a handful of the rope's ashes into her palm. She blew them out slow, a soft scatter that drifted on the prairie breeze like a blessing and a dare. Rourke offered his hand, broad, scarred, the same one that had clawed her free when the dirt pressed her breath away. She took it, not because she needed saving now, but because sometimes a hand was just a hand, and mercy didn't need to be spoken twice. Mag stood waiting, the mule alongside her faithful witness, to the worst and best this stretch of prairie could birth. Rourke helped Eden into the saddle. She didn't sway this time. Her spine held straight. Her eyes drifted once to the lean-to, the ashes cooling in the morning hush. "What about Dryhook?" she asked. Rourke swung up behind her, voice low in her ear. "Dryhook'll bury its own shame soon enough. Let him." They turned west then, the sun at their backs. No plan but a trail. No grave but the one they'd refused to fill. Behind them, the mule brayed, once sharp, stubborn, alive, then fell in step. They rode west through the thinning frost, where the land cracked open into low draws and wind-torn bluffs. Dryhook shrank behind them until it was just a stain on memory, a grave that never closed, a rumor that would rot for lack of a girl to bury under it again. The sun climbed, slow but steady. Rourke kept Mags at an easy pace, the mule trudging faithful alongside. Eden rode stiff at first, ribs tight, throat raw, every bump in the trail, a reminder that you don't come back clean from dirt. But with every mile, the grave dirt flaked away. Her hair lifted in the breeze. She let it tangle free, strands blowing like black ribbon behind Rourke's battered hat. They didn't talk much. Words felt too small for what she'd clawed back from the earth. But when the silence pressed too heavy, Rourke would reach behind him, touch her knee, a simple thing, like checking the saddle cinch. But it said, "I see you breathing in a world that once decided she shouldn't." At dusk they made camp by a dry creek bed littered with pale bones, cow bones, sun-whitened, cracked open by scavengers. Rourke gathered brush and coaxed a fire to life, same way he'd coaxed her breath back from under 6 feet of soil. Eden sat close enough to feel the warmth catch her skin, hands spread to it like it might burn out the last ghost in her veins. When she slept, she dreamed of the rope, but in her dream it never closed. She dreamed of Ruth standing barefoot in cold dirt, of a mule's bray splitting rumor's spine. She dreamed of the earth opening not to swallow her, but to spit her out stubborn and unclean enough to stay living. Near dawn, Rourke found her crouched by the creek bed, fingers tracing a flat stone she'd pulled from the bank. On its surface, she scraped a mark, a simple sign, half cross, half moon. She pressed her thumb over it, leaving a smudge of soot and grave dirt that hadn't yet washed away. "What's that for?" he asked, voice rough from sleep and the chill. She didn't look up. "Marker. A grave?" She laughed soft. "Nothing cruel in it. No grave. Just a place to say I ain't in one." He nodded. Rourke never spoke sermons, but he understood holy ground when he saw it. He helped her up, brushing cold grit from her palm. The scar where the rope had bit her wrist glowed faint pink under new skin. She'd wear it forever, a thin circle that said they tried, and I rose. Not a shame. Not anymore. When they broke camp, she left the stone on a flat ledge, where the creek would flood someday and carry it down to strangers, who might find the sign and wonder who wrote it. Maybe they'd know. Maybe they'd guess. Maybe they'd just sit beside it a while, whisper their own buried things to the wind, then stand up and ride on lighter. By the time the prairie rose up behind them, Dryhook's bell still hadn't rung for her name, but in some quiet corner of Ruth Miller's yard, a small garden bloomed stubborn through cold dirt, and a mule brayed at every fence line like a warning. Don't bury what won't stay buried. Westward, the trail stayed open. Eden leaned into the saddle, Rourke's coat wrapped tight. Rourke touched her knee again when the wind cut mean. She didn't flinch. The sky above them cracked open wide and clean, no rope, no sign, No grave but the ones they refused to dig. And somewhere out there, the wind carried a question soft as an ember. What rumor will they bury you under? And who will dig you free? The prairie kept no answer. Just the hush of hooves, the warm hush of survival, and the stone left behind for whoever needed its proof. Subscribe now for more raw, gripping Wild West tales, true survival, untamed legends, and stories that burn long after.